Hello, all you wonderful readers. It's Mrs. Carrera, and I'm here to continue on with our book, Can You Keep a Secret? This is chapter 7 and possibly 8. So there's our book. All right, here we go. Mike walked toward the classroom very slowly. He felt good that Amy would trust him with her secret. And what a secret! Mr. Warren and Miss Dean? Miss Dean was all right. She was always smiling and happy. If he wanted a girlfriend, and Mike didn't, Miss Dean would be okay. But he had never thought about Mr. Warren having a girlfriend. And now Mike was going to be in the same room with Mr. Warren for the last period before lunch. Mrs. Banks taught math to Mr. Warren's class, and Mr. Warren taught English and reading to Mike's class. Mike had to be careful. Mr. Warren always knew when Mike was hiding something, like this morning. And now he was hiding 2 things. Mike knew what to do. He'd go straight to his desk and get out his books. He'd stay busy all period. He wouldn't even look at Warren. When Mike came in the door, Mr. Warren was erasing the chalkboard. Mike hurried past him, looking the other way. "Hey, Mike," Sam whispered. Mike looked back. "What do you want?" Sam had all of the books out of his desk. "Ernie got loose," he said. "I can't find him." "Oh, no," Mike said. He looked under the desks around him. Then he got down on his knees. Sam grabbed Mike's arm and pulled him up. "Don't do that. Mr. Warren will want to know what you're looking for." "Oh," Mike said. "I didn't think about that." "We'll find him," Sam said. "Everybody's watching for him." Mike sat at his desk and took out his English book. He held it in front of him while he looked around the floor. He didn't see Ernie anywhere. All he saw were shoes, sneakers, lace-ups, and boots. Greg had his feet tucked clear back under his seat. Mike wished that Greg wouldn't worry so much. Who cared if your shoes didn't match? "I need somebody to take a note to the office," Mr. Warren said. People started waving their hands and saying, me. "I'll do it," Mike called out. He loved going down the empty hallways and looking into the other rooms. Mr. Warren looked past him. "Greg, could you do it for me?" Greg's face turned red. "Could somebody else do it?" People turned around and looked at Greg. They couldn't believe he didn't want to go. Mr. Warren sent Britt instead. Mike looked over at Greg. He wished there was some way to help him. Then Mike had an idea. Mike didn't care about shoes that didn't match. Why not trade shoes with Greg? Then Greg wouldn't have to worry. Mike reached down and untied his shoes. Then he slipped them off. When Mr. Warren turned his back, Mike reached over and set his shoes on Brenda's desk. "What are you doing?" Brenda asked. "Hand those to Greg," Mike said. "I don't want to touch those stinky things," Brenda said. "Come on, Brenda, hand them to Greg." Brenda held her nose with one hand, and she picked up the shoes with the other. "They don't stink," Mike said. Mr. Warren came down the aisle. "Brenda," he said, "what are you doing?" "It's not my fault," Brenda said. "Mike put his smelly shoes on my desk. He told me to give them to Greg." Mr. Warren came and took Mike's shoes. Then he looked over at Greg. Greg had his feet tucked under his chair. "I've done the same thing, Greg," Mr. Warren said quietly. "Look at that," Brenda said, loud enough for the whole school to hear. "Greg's shoes don't match at all." So everybody had to come and look. Greg laughed and put his feet out in the aisle, but his face was bright red and he didn't look at anybody. "No big deal," Mr. Warren said. "Haven't you ever done that?" "I have. I got to school once and I saw I had on one black shoe and a brown one. I told everybody it was the new style." "I've done it too," Mike said. That wasn't true, but he wanted Greg to feel better. Mr. Warren handed Mike his shoes. "Put 'em back on, Mike." "Did you ever hear that old song?" He held out his arms and sang, "Way down south in the land of cotton, my feet smell, but yours are rotten." Everybody laughed, even Greg. Mike smiled and pulled on his shoes. He didn't really feel like laughing. He had done it again. He'd given away somebody's secret. "Remember the scary story we read on Friday?" Mr. Warren said. "Think about the things that made it scary." People began to call out answers. "The spooky old house. It was dark. The lightning. The scary noises." "Good," Mr. Warren said. "Can you think of anything else that was scary?" "A snake!" Brenda yelled. "A snake?" Mr. Warren said. "I don't remember a snake in the story." "Not in the story!" Brenda shouted. She was holding her feet off the floor. "Here! There's a dumb snake right over there!" Most people got up and headed for Brenda's desk. Some got up and went to the other way. "I hate snakes," Trent said. "Can I pet him?" Carla asked. "Why does everything have to happen to me?" Brenda moaned. Everybody move back, Mr. Warren said. Sam pushed past the others. I'll catch him for you. I'll get it, Mr. Warren said. But Sam grabbed the snake behind the head and held it up. The snake wiggled, and lots of people said, ooh. Mr. Warren brought the wastebasket. Put it in here, Sam. Sam set the snake in the wastebasket. All right, Mr. Warren said. You can all go back to your seats. If you want to see the snake, raise your hand. I'll bring it by. Most people raised their hands, not Mike. He didn't want Mr. Warren looking at him. Mr. Warren took the snake around the room. Most people said, isn't he cute? Or, can I pet him? A few said, yuck, or ooh. Can I take him home? Nate asked. My sister will jump through the ceiling. Mr. Warren set the wastebasket in the corner and put some big books on the top. Now, he said, standing by the front desk, how did the snake get here? Nobody said anything. Mike felt his stomach get tight. Let's be detectives, Mr. Warren said. Can snakes fly? Did it fly in through the window? People laughed and shook their heads. How do snakes get places? They crawl, somebody said. Now, could the snake crawl into the room? Some people shook their heads. Why not? It couldn't climb the steps, Trent said. And it couldn't open the door, Nate said. Exactly, Mr. Warren looked at the class. And if the snake didn't come on its own, then there's only one answer left. Somebody brought it. And it wasn't me. And it wasn't Mrs. Banks. So who was it? Mr. Warren started looking at people one at a time. Mike didn't know what to do. If Mr. Warren saw his face, he'd probably know Mike was hiding something. But if Mike looked away, that would be worse. And here's a picture of it. But Mr. Warren wasn't looking at Mike. He was looking straight at Sam. Mike knew Sam was in trouble, and he wanted to help. It wasn't Sam, he yelled out. He didn't bring the snake to school. Everybody broke out laughing. Everybody but Sam. He shook his head and muttered, I knew it. Mr. Warren wasn't laughing, but he didn't look mad either. Mike and Sam, come up here. Mike got up slowly. It was the same old story. He tried to help and made things worse. You did it again, Nate whispered. Mike looked over at Sam. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could still help. It wasn't Sam's snake, he called out. It was mine. I was the one. I brought it to school. Forget it, Mike, Sam said. He had the hot tamales box in his hand. Mr. Warren knows it was my snake. Chapter 8. While Mr. Warren was asking questions about the snake, Amy kept her head down. She was afraid to look him in the eye. The whole thing was her fault. She hadn't closed the box. So the snake had gotten loose and the whole class was in trouble. And it was all because of her. When Mr. Warren started looking at people, Amy got really scared. What if he looked at her? Would she be able to keep her face straight? Then Mike shouted, it wasn't Sam, and the whole class laughed. Amy felt sorry for Mike. She knew he hadn't meant to tell on Sam, but now he and Sam were both in trouble. Take out your books, Mr. Warren said. Read the story on page 33. He picked up the waste paper basket and went outside along with Sam and Mike. Old Mike did it again, Nate said. They're in big time trouble, Fred said. Amy opened her book, but she was too upset to read anything. She was safe. Nobody would ever know that she let the snake get loose, but she felt awful. Mike and Sam were in trouble because of her. She thought about going outside and telling Mr. Warren what she'd done, but it wouldn't do any good. Mike and Sam would still be in trouble. So Mr. Warren came back into the room with the waste paper basket. Amy could tell that the snake wasn't in it. You people know the rules, Mr. Warren said. No animals at school. If you break the rules, you go see Mrs. Sanchez. Amy shivered. So Mike and Sam were going to the principal's office, all because of her. Has everybody finished reading the story? Mr. Warren asked a few minutes later. 2 or 3 people said no. Take another minute, Mr. Warren said. If you're done, think about how this story is different from Friday's story. We shouldn't have to read stories like this, Brenda said. I bet I'll have nightmares tonight. Amy looked down at her book. She hadn't even started to read. What's the story about? She whispered to Nate. This kid goes to sleep in a cave, Nate said. Then a bear comes in. Amy turned to the end of the story. She started to read about the bear, but she ended up thinking about Mike. All right, Mr. Warren said. How are the 2 stories alike? They're both rotten, Brenda muttered. Kids get scared, Britt said. Right, Mr. Warren said. People are scared in both stories. Really scared. But is there a difference? This guy has a good reason to be scared, Nate said. The bear can eat him up. The people in the other story don't. They just get spooked by the noises. But people are scared just the same, Mr. Warren said, whether the danger is real or not. The class went on talking about being scared and being in danger. Fred started to tell about being chased by a bull. Save that story, Fred, Mr. Warren said. It's perfect for the writing we're going to do. I want each of you to write about a time you were scared. You can finish by saying whether or not you were in real danger. I'll do one about the roller coaster at the fair, Nate said. Hey, Brenda, Fred whispered. You can write about being attacked by Sam's monster snake. You can write about looking in the mirror, Brenda said. What if you can't think of anything, Carla asked. I can't remember any time I was scared. Amy wished that was her trouble. She decided to write about being in a car accident. She remembered the tires squealing and the horrible thump. Nobody had been hurt, but she still got chills when she thought about those sounds. It was a lot easier to talk about dented fenders than about snakes in boxes or teachers kissing. Afterward, people read their stories. Most of the stories were about real danger, a fire, getting lost in the mountains, and she read hers about the car wreck. A few people told about scary stories when there was no danger. Britt told about a monster movie, and Fred's bull had ended up licking his face. Nate told about riding the roller coaster. Was that real danger? Mr. Warren asked the class. No, everybody said. Yes, it was, Nate said. I could have been killed, and I almost had a heart attack besides. Amy found herself watching Mr. Warren, but whenever he looked toward her, she looked away. In a way, she was scared of him, which was silly. She knew there was no danger, but she still felt funny. Mike and Sam came back to the room just before the lunch bell. Tell us your story, Mr. Warren said. I want people to know what happens if they bring an animal to the school. Mike and Sam stood in front of the class. They elbowed each other. They both said, You go ahead. No, you go ahead. Finally, Sam said, We took Ernie back to the bus stop and we let him go. And here's a picture of the boys up in front. Too bad, Carla said. And we have to write reports on snakes, Mike said. And if we bring another animal to school, Sam added, we get kicked out for a week. Amy felt so sorry for Mike. He'd gone to the principal and he had to write a report, and he really hadn't done anything except try to help. She watched Mike walk back and flop down in his seat. She wanted to talk to him. She kind of wanted to tell him what she had done, but she wasn't sure about that. As soon as the bell rang, she called over to Mike. Hey, Mike, I want to talk to you. He looked up and smiled. Don't worry, he said. I didn't tell anybody. You didn't tell? What didn't you tell? Brenda asked, loud enough for everybody to hear. What's going on? Nate asked. Brenda pointed at Amy. Mike told her he didn't tell anybody. I think they have a secret. Not for long, Nate said. He turned to Amy. Come on, Amy, you might as well tell us right now. We'll all find out anyway. Amy wanted to run. All kinds of people came crowding around. You won't find out from me, Mike called. He pretended to zip his mouth. My lips are zipped. He'll tell, Nate said. Just wait. Mike went running for the door. No way! Brenda moved up closer to Amy. What is it? Is it a real secret? You can tell us, Nate. Yeah, somebody else said. Amy wanted to move back, but her desk was in the way. It's nothing, she said. You guys go on, Brenda said. This is girl stuff. No problem, Nate said. I'll find out from Mike. He headed for the door. Most of the others went with him. You can tell me, Amy, Brenda said. Amy shook her head. It's nobody's business. Brenda snorted. Well, you don't have to be that way. I don't care about your stupid secret. She turned her back and walked away. Amy picked up her lunch bag. She wished Sarah hadn't moved away. She needed to talk to her. Better yet, Amy wished she had moved away with Sarah. She'd like to be in Arizona right now, or anywhere else, just so it was a long way away from here. All right, that is the end of our 2 chapters. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see what happens next week. Bye.